In the quiet coastal town of Harbour Point, Tom Reyes stood before the crumbling Victorian mansion that would change everything. The widowed father of one had just buried his estranged grandfather and inherited what the neighbours called the junk house, a leaking, sagging monument to decades of neglect. The real estate agents snickered. The town council rolled their eyes. Even his own teenage daughter shook her head in disappointment. Tom had lost his job 3 months earlier, and this inheritance felt like the universe's cruel joke. Room after room overflowed with what looked like decades of hoarded, trash-rusted gadgets, yellowed blueprints, and contraptions that made no sense. The roof leaked so badly that buckets lined the hallways like sentries. The electrical system sparked and hissed warnings with every flip of a switch. But something about the old house whispered to him. Maybe it was the way the sea breeze moved through the broken windows, or how the scattered blueprints seemed to dance in the salt air. What hidden treasure could possibly lie beneath decades of ridicule and neglect? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tom Reyes had always been a man who fixed things. For 15 years, he'd worked as a systems engineer at Coastal Solar Solutions, designing the electrical frameworks that turned sunlight into power for suburban homes. His hands knew the weight of copper wire, the resistance of circuits, the delicate balance required to capture nature's energy and make it useful. But 3 months ago, when the company downsized and his position disappeared, those same hands had felt suddenly useless. Now, standing in the morning light that filtered through the salt-stained windows of his grandfather's house, Tom felt that familiar itch to understand how things worked. The Victorian mansion at 47 Tidewater Lane had been in the Reyes family for over 60 years, though Tom had visited only a handful of times as a child. His memories of grandfather Eduardo were fragments: a man with oil-stained fingers, who smelled of salt water and metal shavings, who spoke in accented English about catching the breath of the sea. "Dad, this place is seriously disgusting," Leah's voice carried from the kitchen, where she was attempting to clear enough space for their morning coffee. At 17, his daughter had inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's engineering mind. Though she applied both to rolling her eyes at what she considered her father's latest bout of misguided optimism. Tom understood her frustration. The house seemed to exhale decades of neglect with every creaking floorboard. In the 3 days since the funeral, they'd made barely a dent in the accumulated chaos. Every room told the same story: towering stacks of newspapers from the 1980s, cardboard boxes labeled in Eduardo's spidery handwriting, and everywhere the strange mechanical contraptions that had earned the old man his reputation as the town eccentric. Harbour Point itself felt like a town caught between tides. Once a thriving fishing village, it had watched its industry drift away to larger ports over the past 2 decades. The downtown consisted of a handful of shops that seemed to exist more from habit than profit, a diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and a small marina where pleasure boats far outnumbered working vessels. The population had dropped to just under 3,000, mostly retirees and families too, rooted to leave. Tom had moved here not by choice, but by necessity. His unemployment benefits were running out, and the small life insurance policy from Maria's death 2 years ago had long since been exhausted by medical bills. The house represented his only asset, and every real estate agent in town had the same advice: tear it down and sell the lot. The Victorians' foundation was solid, they admitted, but everything else needed work that would cost more than the property was worth. "Look at this thing," Leah said, emerging from the kitchen with a peculiar device in her hands. It looked like a brass compass, but instead of pointing north, its needle swayed back and forth in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "It's been doing this since I picked it up. Is it broken?" Tom took the device, feeling its surprising weight. The brass was tarnished but not corroded, and the face was covered with markings he didn't recognize in not quite nautical charts, but something similar. As he held it, he noticed the needle's movement wasn't random. It seemed to respond to something, pulsing in a pattern that reminded him of breathing. "Where did you find this?" In that desk by the window, there's a whole drawer full of weird stuff like this. And Dad, she paused, her expression shifting from annoyance to something approaching curiosity. There's a book. I think it's like a journal or something. It's all in English, but the handwriting is really hard to read. Tom set the compass on the kitchen table and followed his daughter to the small writing desk, positioned to catch the morning light from the eastern windows. The desk itself was a beautiful piece-dark wood with brass fittings, the kind of furniture that spoke of a time when things were built to last. Leah had already opened the bottom drawer, revealing a collection of items that seemed to belong in a maritime museum. More brass instruments, rolled charts, and small glass vials filled with what looked like dried seaweed. But it was the leather-bound journal that drew his attention. The cover was weathered to the color of aged bourbon, and the pages had that soft, yellowed quality that came from decades of handling. Tom opened it carefully, and immediately recognized his grandfather's handwriting, the same careful script that had addressed birthday cards and Christmas packages throughout his childhood. Day 1, 247 of the Tide Project, the first entry read. The morning brought a southeast wind at 12 knots, and the water moved with purpose. I watched from the pier as the harbour breathed in and out, drawing power from the moon's pull. There is energy here, more than the town understands, more than anyone understands. Tom flipped through the pages, finding entry after entry filled with observations about wind patterns, tidal schedules, and detailed sketches of mechanical devices. The drawings were remarkably precise, the work of someone who understood engineering principles, not the doodles of an eccentric hobbyist. The key is not to fight the water but to dance with it. Read another entry. Solar panels stand still and wait for the sun. Wind turbines spin and hope for weather. But the tides are reliable. They come and go with the precision of a Swiss watch, carrying more energy than this small town could use in a lifetime. Dad, what is all this? Leah leaned over his shoulder, her earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine interest. I think your great-grandfather was working on something, Tom said, turning to a page filled with mathematical calculations. The formulas were complex, dealing with fluid dynamics and energy conversion rates. Something involving the tides. As if summoned by their conversation, a voice called from the front door. Hello? Anyone home? Tom looked up to see a woman in her 60s standing in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore the kind of clothes that suggested she'd been gardening dirt-stained jeans and a faded sweater that had seen better decades. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, stepping inside with the confidence of someone who'd been welcome in this house before. I'm Eleanor Henderson. I live next door. She gestured vaguely toward the east. I just wanted to introduce myself and, well, offer my condolences. Eduardo was a good neighbor. Tom stood, grateful for the interruption. Tom Reyes, this is my daughter Leah. Thank you for the kind words. Eleanor's eyes swept over the cluttered room with a mixture of affection and concern. I suppose you're wondering what to do with all this. She gestured at the stacks of papers and mysterious devices. Eduardo was quite the collector. Did you know him well? Tom asked. Well enough. He'd been working on his projects for as long as I can remember. Always tinkering with something, always convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Eleanor's smile was gentle but tinged with the kind of fondness reserved for harmless eccentrics. The town folks thought he was a bit odd, but he never bothered anyone. Kept to himself mostly, except when he'd get excited about some new discovery. What kind of discoveries? Eleanor glanced at the journal in Tom's hands. Energy, mostly. He was convinced that all the answers were right here in the harbour. Said the old fishing families had been fools to chase after fish when they could have been harvesting the power of the tides themselves. She paused, studying Tom's face. You have his eyes, you know. The same intensity when you're thinking about something. Tom felt a strange stirring of connection to this grandfather he'd barely known. Mrs. Henderson, do you think any of his ideas actually worked? Oh, my dear, I wouldn't know about that. I'm just an old woman who grows tomatoes and feeds stray cats. but her eyes suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Though I will say this, Eduardo never gave up. Right until the end, he was convinced that this house held the key to something important. Said it was all about location, about being in the right place where the water does its work. After Eleanor left, Tom and Leah continued their exploration of the desk. In the bottom drawer, beneath the maritime instruments, Tom found a small brass key ring holding half a dozen keys of different sizes and ages. Some were clearly modern, but others looked like they belonged to another century entirely. "What do you think these open?" Leah asked, examining the keys. "I guess we'll find out." Tom pocketed the key ring and turned back to the journal. As he read more entries, a picture began to emerge of a man who wasn't just collecting junk, but conducting systematic research. Eduardo had been tracking tidal patterns, measuring water flow, and documenting the behavior of what he called the harbor's natural engine. Maria stopped by today, read one entry from several years ago. She brought little Tom with her. The boy has good hands and a curious mind. I showed him the compass, and he understood immediately that it was responding to something. His questions were the right questions. Perhaps when he's older, he'll understand what all this means. Tom's throat tightened. He had no memory of that visit, but the idea that his grandfather had been watching him, evaluating him, planning for this moment, filled him with an unexpected sense of purpose. "Leah, I want to try something." He picked up one of the smaller keys and approached a glass-fronted cabinet that had been locked since they'd arrived. The key fit perfectly, and the cabinet door swung open with a soft click. Inside, instead of more random artifacts, Tom found a collection of small mechanical devices arranged with obvious care. Each was labeled with a tag written in Eduardo's careful script: Tidal Flow Meter Prototype 3, Current Converter Modified Design, Pressure Differential Gauge Working Model. These weren't the random accumulations of a hoarder. They were the organized tools of an inventor. "Dad," Leah said quietly, "I think great-grandfather was actually trying to build something." Tom nodded, feeling the first real spark of hope he'd experienced in months. Maybe this inheritance wasn't a burden after all. Maybe it was an opportunity to finish something important, something that had been waiting for the right person to understand its value. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the harbor in shades of gold and silver, Tom made a decision. He wouldn't sell the house. Not yet. First, he needed to understand what Eduardo had been working on, and whether those careful plans and precise calculations might hold the key to solving his own problems. Outside, the tide was coming in, and for the first time, Tom found himself listening to the sound of the water against the shore, not as background noise, but as a source of power waiting to be harnessed. The journal had been right about one thing. There was energy here, more than anyone understood, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for someone to figure out how to capture it. The discovery happened on their 4th day in the house, while Tom was trying to fix the water damage in what had once been Eduardo's workshop. The basement room stretched nearly the full length of the Victorian's foundation, with workbenches lining the walls and pegboards that still held the shadows of tools long since removed or rusted beyond use. Tom had been following a trail of water stains across the ceiling when he noticed something odd about the wall paneling. One section didn't quite match the others. The wood grain ran in a slightly different direction, and when he pressed against it, he felt the slightest give, as if there was space behind it. "Leah, come down here," he called, running his fingers along the edges of the suspicious panel. His daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, her phone's flashlight cutting through the basement's gloom. "Find another leak?" "Maybe something more interesting." Tom retrieved Eduardo's key ring from his pocket and examined the panel more carefully. Near the bottom, almost hidden by decades of paint and grime, he found a small keyhole. The third key he tried fit perfectly. With a soft click, the panel swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a space about the size of a medicine cabinet. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas and protected from the basement's dampness, sat a device unlike anything Tom had seen in Eduardo's collection. The miniature tidal generator was perhaps 18 inches tall and built with the precision of a Swiss watch. Its brass and steel components gleamed despite their age, and at its heart sat a series of small turbine blades that caught the light like polished silver. Connected to the main housing were copper wires, glass tubes, and what appeared to be a miniature version of the crystalline formations Tom had noticed in some of Eduardo's laboratory equipment. "What is it?" Leah asked, descending the stairs for a closer look. "I think it's a working model." Tom lifted the device carefully, surprised by its weight and the quality of its construction. Every component showed signs of meticulous craftsmanship, joints soldered with mathematical precision, gears cut to tolerances that would have challenged modern manufacturing. At the bottom of the hidden compartment, Tom found a rolled piece of paper. Eduardo's handwriting covered both sides, detailing the device's construction and, more importantly, its performance specifications. Prototype. 7 final working model. The notes began. Efficiency rate, 80. 7% conversion of kinetic water energy to electrical output. Tested in harbor conditions over 347 days. Average daily power generation, 2.3 kilowatt-hours from 4-foot tidal differential. Scaled calculations indicate potential for community-level implementation. Tom read the numbers twice, then a third time. If Eduardo's calculations were correct, this small device could generate enough electricity to power a typical household for several hours using nothing but the natural rise and fall of the tides. "We need to test this," he said. They spent the next hour clearing space in the workshop and rigging up a makeshift testing apparatus. Tom filled a large plastic storage container with water and used a small pump to create artificial current. When he submerged the device and activated the pump, the miniature turbines began to spin with a soft whirring sound. The attached voltmeter immediately registered a steady electrical output. "It works," Leah whispered, staring at the needle's steady movement. "Dad, it actually works." Tom felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just some eccentric inventor's fantasy. Eduardo had built a functioning tidal energy generator, and according to his notes, he'd been testing it successfully for nearly a year. The implications were staggering. "Tom, are you down there?" The voice from upstairs belonged to a man, confident and carrying the particular authority that came with expensive suits and legal paperwork. Tom quickly unplugged the device and covered it with the canvas as footsteps descended the basement stairs. Marcus Crane appeared in the doorway, a man in his 50s, wearing the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the late morning hour, and his navy suit suggested someone who charged by the hour for his time. "Mr. Reyes, I hope you don't mind my letting myself in." The front door was open, and when no one answered my knock, Crane's gaze swept over the workshop with obvious distaste. "I'm Marcus Crane, Crane Development Associates. I represent several interested parties who are very eager to discuss your property." "Interested parties?" "Investors, Mr. Reyes. People who see the potential in this lot once the existing structure is removed." Crane stepped further into the workshop, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "I understand you've been exploring your options, and I'm here to make those options much more attractive." Tom straightened, feeling protective of the space and its secrets. "I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the property yet." Of course. These decisions take time." Crane's smile widened, but his eyes remained calculating. "However, I should mention that the Harbour Point Town Council met yesterday evening, and there's been some discussion about this particular property. It seems there are concerns about structural integrity, potential environmental hazards from all the," he gestured vaguely at the workshop, "accumulated materials." "Environmental hazards?" "Old paint, chemical residues, that sort of thing. The kind of problems that could require expensive remediation before any sale could proceed through normal channels." Crane paused, letting the implications settle. "Unless, of course, the property was sold to someone prepared to handle those complications as part of a larger development project." Leah stepped closer to her father, and Tom could feel her tension. "What kind of development project?" "Nothing too ambitious. The town needs additional parking for the waterfront district. A small lot, some basic landscaping. Clean, simple, beneficial to the community. Crane reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. I'm prepared to offer 75, zero for the property, cash, with a closing date of next Friday. That would give you enough time to clear out any personal items and avoid any complications with the town's environmental assessment. Tom stared at the offer. $75,000 would solve his immediate financial problems, pay off his debts, and give him enough cushion to find another job, without the pressure of looming bankruptcy. It was more money than he'd expected the property to be worth, especially given its condition. But it was also less than half what the lot alone should have been worth in a coastal town, even a declining one like Harbor Point. And the deadline felt aggressive, designed to prevent him from exploring other options or understanding the property's true value. That's very generous, Tom said carefully, but I need more time to think about it. Crane's smile flickered. Mr. Reyes, I hope you'll understand that opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. The town council is meeting again on Monday, and I'm told the environmental assessment could be quite comprehensive, the kind of thing that might tie up a property for months, possibly years. The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Sell now, or face bureaucratic obstacles that would make any future sale difficult and expensive. I understand, Tom replied, but I still need time to consider my options. After Crane left, Tom and Leah sat in the workshop silence, the covered prototype between them like a shared secret. Dad, he's trying to pressure you into selling, Leah said. I know. Tom looked around the workshop, seeing it now not as a collection of junk, but as the laboratory of someone who'd been working on something revolutionary. But I don't think we should. Because of that thing? She gestured toward the covered device. Because of what that thing represents. Tom uncovered the prototype, its brass and steel components catching the light from the basement's single bulb. Leah, if your great-grandfather's calculations are right, this could change everything. Not just for us, but for the whole town. You really think it could work on a bigger scale? Tom picked up Eduardo's notes and read through the scaling calculations again. The mathematics were sound, the engineering principles solid. More importantly, the small-scale test had proven the concept worked. I think it's worth finding out. He met his daughter's eyes, seeing some of his own excitement reflected there. I think it's worth fighting for. That evening, as Tom reviewed Eduardo's journal by lamplight, he found an entry that seemed written directly to him. The young man who inherits this work will face a choice. He can sell what he doesn't understand, or he can commit to understanding what cannot be sold. The tides don't care about human timelines or financial pressures. They have been keeping their rhythm for millions of years, and they will continue long after we are gone. The question is whether we will learn to dance with them, or continue to fight against forces far greater than ourselves. Tom closed the journal and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. The tide was coming in, just as it had twice daily for those millions of years Eduardo had written about. But now, instead of seeing just water, Tom saw potential energy vast, renewable, reliable, and completely untapped. Tomorrow, he would start figuring out how to build something bigger. Tonight, he had a phone call to make to Marcus Crane to tell him the answer was no. The prototype sat on the workbench behind him, its turbines still and silent but full of promise. Eduardo had given him more than just a house full of junk. He'd given him a legacy worth fighting for, and the tools to understand it. Outside, the tide continued its ancient rhythm, carrying with it the power to change everything. The next morning brought Frank Delacroix to the front door, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the expression of a man who'd been wrestling with his conscience all night. Frank was perhaps 70 years old, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent working outdoors. His hands were permanently stained with wood varnish and marine paint, and he moved with the careful precision of someone whose livelihood had depended on building things that could survive storms at sea. "I knew your grandfather," he said without preamble when Tom answered the door. "Figured it was time we talked." They sat on the front porch, watching the morning light play across the harbor while Frank explained his connection to Eduardo. For 15 years, the two men had been neighbors and occasional collaborators, sharing tools and expertise when their projects overlapped. Eduardo wasn't crazy, Frank said, pouring coffee from his thermos into 2 ceramic mugs. Eccentric, sure. Single-minded, absolutely. But everything he did had a purpose. He gestured toward the workshop windows. I helped him build some of those contraptions. The man knew his way around mechanical systems better than most engineers half his age. Mrs. Henderson said the town thought he was harmless but odd. Frank snorted. The town thinks anyone who reads books and doesn't watch television is odd. Eduardo was working on something important. Something that could have changed this whole region if people had been willing to listen. What kind of something? Power generation. Clean, renewable, reliable power that didn't depend on whether the sun was shining or the wind was blowing. Frank studied Tom's face. I'm guessing you found some of his work. Tom hesitated, then decided that Frank's obvious affection for Eduardo earned him some honesty. I found a prototype, a tidal energy generator. Ah. Frank's expression shifted to something approaching satisfaction. The one he kept in the hidden compartment. I wondered when you'd find that. You knew about it. I helped him test it. Eduardo had me take it out to the harbor in my skiff, drop it in different locations to measure the water flow and energy output. Frank's eyes grew distant with memory. That little device could power my workshop for 3 hours straight, just from 4 feet of tidal differential. Never seen anything like it. Tom felt a surge of validation. If Frank, clearly a practical man with decades of maritime experience, believed in Eduardo's work, then the prototype's potential was real. Frank, do you think it could be scaled up, made bigger? Eduardo thought so. He had plans, detailed engineering drawings for units that could power whole neighborhoods. Frank set down his mug and looked directly at Tom. But he also knew he'd need help. The kind of help that comes with expertise he didn't have and resources he couldn't afford. What kind of expertise? Electrical engineering, for one thing. Eduardo understood mechanical systems, but the power distribution and grid integration that was beyond his knowledge base. Frank paused. Of course, you've got an engineering background, don't you? Solar systems, if I remember what Eduardo told me. Solar panels and electrical systems, yes. But tidal energy is different. Different, but not impossible. The basic principles are the same. You're converting kinetic energy into electrical energy. The challenge is efficiency and scale. They spent the morning systematically exploring Eduardo's workshop, with Frank explaining the purpose and evolution of various devices. What had initially appeared to be random accumulation revealed itself as the organized progression of an experimental process. Each contraption represented a step in Eduardo's understanding of how to harness tidal energy efficiently. This here, Frank said, pointing to an elaborate wooden mechanism that dominated one corner of the workshop, was his first attempt at a gear reduction system. The idea was to capture the slow, powerful movement of the tides and convert it into faster rotation for electrical generation. The hand-carved wooden gear system was a marvel of craftsmanship. Each gear was cut to perfect tolerances, with teeth that meshed smoothly, despite being carved entirely by hand. The wood itself was some kind of hardwood that had been treated to resist moisture, and the entire mechanism moved with the fluid precision of a fine clock. Eduardo carved every one of these gears himself, Frank continued. Took him 2 years to get the ratios right. See, the tides move slowly but with tremendous force. To generate electricity efficiently, you need the turbines to spin much faster than the water moves. This gear system multiplies the rotation speed by a factor of nearly 50. Tom examined the gear mechanism more closely, running his fingers along the smooth wooden teeth. The engineering was sophisticated, not the work of a hobbyist, but of someone who understood mechanical advantage and power transmission at a fundamental level. Frank, where did Eduardo learn to do this kind of work? That's the thing most people in town never knew about him. Eduardo wasn't just some eccentric retiree. He was a marine engineer in the Navy for 20 years, worked on submarine power systems and ship propulsion. When he retired and moved here, he brought all that knowledge with him. This revelation reframed everything Tom had learned about his grandfather. The precision of the workshop, the sophistication of the designs, the systematic approach to experimentation, it all made sense if Eduardo had been a trained engineer rather than simply an inspired tinkerer. But if he had that background, why didn't anyone take his work seriously? Frank's expression darkened slightly. Because about 10 years ago, Eduardo made some enemies. He was working with a small renewable energy company, trying to develop his tidal system commercially. But when the prototype showed real promise, some larger interests got involved. Oil companies, mostly, who didn't want to see another renewable energy source gaining traction. What happened? Patent disputes, mostly. Eduardo's former Navy connections meant some of his knowledge touched on classified technologies. The oil company's lawyers found ways to tie up his patents in court, claiming his work was too similar to government research to be commercially viable. Frank shook his head. Eduardo spent 3 years and most of his savings fighting legal battles. In the end, he gave up on commercial development and focused on perfecting the technology. So he was protecting it by hiding it. Exactly. Eduardo knew his work was important, but he also knew it needed to wait for the right time and the right person to carry it forward. Frank looked meaningfully at Tom, someone with the technical background to understand it and the motivation to fight for it. As the afternoon progressed, Tom began to understand the scope of Eduardo's vision. The workshop contained not just the gear system and prototype, but detailed drawings for a modular tidal energy network that could be installed throughout Harbor Point's waterfront. Each unit would be relatively small and unobtrusive, but working together, they could generate enough power to make the town energy independent. The beauty of the system, Frank explained, is that it works with the existing harbor infrastructure. No massive construction projects, no environmental disruption. The units get installed on existing pier pilings and seawalls, using the natural tidal flow that's already there. Tom studied the installation drawings, noting how Eduardo had carefully mapped the harbor's tidal patterns and identified optimal placement for maximum energy capture. The man had thought of everything: environmental impact, installation logistics, maintenance access, even aesthetic considerations to ensure the units wouldn't detract from the harbor's appearance. But as impressive as the designs were, Tom could see challenges that Eduardo might not have fully considered. Modern electrical codes, grid integration requirements, environmental permitting, and the complex web of regulations that governed any kind of energy infrastructure development. Frank, even if this technology works perfectly, implementing it would require permits, approvals, probably environmental impact studies. All of which take time and money, Frank agreed, and all of which can be delayed or blocked by people who don't want to see it succeed. Like Marcus Crane and his investors. Like Marcus Crane and whoever's backing him. Eduardo always suspected the pressure to sell this property wasn't just about development. He thought someone knew what he was working on and wanted to make sure it never saw the light of day. That evening, Tom sat in Eduardo's workshop, surrounded by the evidence of his grandfather's lifework. The wooden gear system caught the light from the overhead bulb, its precisely carved teeth seeming to promise smooth, efficient power conversion. The prototype generator sat nearby, its brass components gleaming with potential. For the first time since losing his job, Tom felt the stirring of genuine excitement about the future. Eduardo had given him more than just a house, he'd given him a purpose, a project that could transform not just his own financial situation, but the entire community's relationship with energy independence. But he also understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead. To turn Eduardo's vision into reality, he would need allies, resources, and expertise beyond his own. Most importantly, he would need to protect the technology from those who wanted to see it buried. Tom opened Eduardo's journal to a page he'd bookmarked earlier, reading again the words that seemed to speak directly to his situation. The hardest part of any breakthrough is not the technical challenges, but the human ones. People fear change, even when that change could benefit them. They trust what they know, even when what they know is failing them. The inventor's job is not just to solve technical problems, but to help people imagine a better future. Outside, the tide was going out, and Tom could hear the water moving against the harbor's seawalls with that ancient, reliable rhythm. Somewhere in that movement was enough energy to power the entire town, waiting for someone with the courage and persistence to capture it. Eduardo had spent years preparing the way. Now, it was Tom's turn to carry the work forward. The attic had been Eduardo's private laboratory, and Tom discovered it only by accident while investigating a persistent leak in the roof. What he'd initially taken for water damage turned out to be condensation from a small climate-controlled chamber hidden behind the attic's slanted eaves. The chamber was barely large enough for a person to stand upright, but it contained Eduardo's most sophisticated work. Shelves lined the walls, holding dozens of small devices and components, each labeled with the same careful handwriting Tom had found throughout the house. But it was the lead-lined box in the center of the room that drew his attention, a container designed to protect its contents from electromagnetic interference. Inside the box, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay a crystalline device, unlike anything Tom had seen in his 15 years as an electrical engineer. The central component appeared to be a modified salt crystal, roughly the size of a tennis ball, surrounded by an intricate network of copper wire wound in precise geometric patterns. The entire assembly was mounted in a housing made from what looked like recycled ship components, brass fittings, and steel brackets that bore the unmistakable marks of Eduardo's craftsmanship. "Leah, come up here," Tom called down through the attic access. "I need you to see this." His daughter appeared at the top of the ladder, her phone's flashlight illuminating the cramped space. "What is it this time?" "I think it's a battery. But unlike any battery I've ever seen." Tom lifted the device carefully, noting its surprising weight and the way the crystal seemed to catch and reflect light from within its structure. Eduardo's notes, carefully preserved in a waterproof folder, explained the device's purpose and construction. The crystalline energy storage device was designed to capture and store electrical energy generated by the tidal system. But unlike conventional batteries, it used the natural piezoelectric properties of modified salt crystals to achieve storage densities that exceeded anything in commercial production. Piezoelectric means it generates electricity when compressed. Tom read from Eduardo's notes. But Eduardo figured out how to reverse the process. Applying electricity causes controlled compression that stores energy in the crystal matrix. When you need the power back, you release the compression and the crystal discharges. "That sounds like science fiction," Leah said. "It sounds impossible," Tom agreed, "but so did solar panels 50 years ago." According to Eduardo's calculations, the crystalline device could store roughly 10 times more energy per pound than the best lithium-ion batteries currently available. More importantly, it could maintain that storage indefinitely without degradation, and it was built entirely from materials that could be sourced locally: salt from the harbor, copper from marine salvage, and piezoelectric amplifiers that Eduardo had crafted from recycled electronics. "We need to test this," Tom said, "but I'm going to need help. This is beyond my expertise." "What kind of help?" Tom thought about the challenge ahead. Eduardo's tidal generator and storage system represented cutting-edge technology, but it was also highly specialized work that would require expertise in multiple fields. He needed someone who understood both the electronics and the kind of innovative thinking that had allowed Eduardo to develop solutions outside conventional approaches. "I need someone who thinks like Eduardo did, someone who sees possibilities instead of limitations." The answer came from an unexpected source. While loading supplies at Harbor Point's small electronics shop the next day, Tom overheard a conversation between the shop owner and a young woman who was explaining why a particular computer repair couldn't be done using standard methods. "The motherboard architecture is too old for modern replacement parts," she was saying, "but if you modify the power supply connections and bridge the data pathways with custom adapters, you can make it work with newer components. It's not elegant, but it's functional." The young woman was perhaps 25, with short-cropped hair and the kind of intense focus that Tom recognized in serious engineers. She spoke with the precise vocabulary of someone who understood technology at a fundamental level, but her suggestions showed the creative problem-solving that conventional training often discouraged. "Excuse me," Tom interrupted. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you an electrical engineer?" She turned to study him with curious eyes. "Maya Chen. And no, not formally. I'm self-taught, mostly. I fix things that other people say can't be fixed." Her expression was direct, but not unfriendly. "You're the guy who inherited Eduardo's house, right?" "Tom Reyes. How did you—" "Small town. Word gets around." Maya's interest sharpened. "I heard you've been exploring his workshop. Find anything interesting?" Tom hesitated. He'd been careful not to discuss Eduardo's work with anyone except Frank, but something about Maya's directness and obvious technical competence made him willing to take a risk. "Would you be interested in looking at some unusual electrical devices? I could use a second opinion on whether they actually work." An hour later, Maya stood in Eduardo's attic laboratory, examining the crystalline storage device with the focused attention of a jeweler evaluating a rare gem. She'd brought a collection of testing equipment, multimeters, oscilloscopes, and diagnostic tools that she'd assembled from salvaged components, with the same creative approach Eduardo had used in his own work. "This is remarkable," she said, after spending 20 minutes examining the device's construction. "The copper winding pattern is based on sacred geometry mathematical relationships that maximize the electromagnetic field interactions with the crystal matrix. And the crystal itself," she held up a small sample that Eduardo had left for testing. "This isn't just salt. It's been modified somehow, maybe with trace minerals that enhance the piezoelectric response. Can you tell if it works?" "Only one way to find out." Maya connected her testing equipment to the device's input and output terminals. "According to Eduardo's notes, we should be able to charge it with low-voltage DC current and then discharge it at a controlled rate." The first test was modest. Maya applied 12 volts from a small battery for 30 seconds, then switched the connections to measure the device's output. The results exceeded Eduardo's projections. The crystal had not only stored the input energy, but seemed to have amplified it, delivering nearly 50% more power than had been put in. "That's impossible," Maya said, staring at her instruments. "You can't get more energy out than you put in. It violates the laws of thermodynamics." "Unless it's drawing energy from somewhere else," Tom suggested. Maya ran the test again, this time monitoring the device more carefully. The second trial showed the same result: energy amplification that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. "Eduardo's notes mentioned something about environmental resonance," Tom said, reading from the carefully preserved documentation. He thought the crystal might be responding to ambient electromagnetic fields, natural energy sources that are always present, but usually too weak to measure. "Like a receiving antenna that's also a battery," Maya said slowly. "The crystal stores the energy you put into it, but it also captures background electromagnetic radiation and converts that into stored power." She looked up from her instruments with growing excitement. "Tom, if this is real, it's revolutionary. Not just for tidal energy, but for any kind of power storage application." Leah, who had been watching the tests with skeptical interest, spoke up. "So this thing is like a super battery that also charges itself?" "More like a super battery that charges itself while it's storing other energy," Maya corrected. "It's passive energy harvesting combined with advanced storage technology." They spent the rest of the afternoon running tests and documenting results. Each trial confirmed Eduardo's projections. The crystalline device could store massive amounts of energy in a compact form, and it seemed to maintain a background charging process that slowly added to its capacity over time. "Maya," Tom said as they were packing up the testing equipment, "would you be interested in a consulting project? I'm trying to understand all of Eduardo's work, and I think this storage system is just one piece of a much larger puzzle." "What kind of puzzle?" "A complete tidal energy system, Generator, storage, power, distribution, everything needed to make Harbor Point Energy independent. Maya's eyes lit up with the unmistakable gleam of someone presented with an irresistible technical challenge. "When do we start?" That evening, Tom called Frank to share the day's discoveries. The older man listened carefully as Tom described the crystalline storage device and Maya's test results. "That explains a lot," Frank said finally. Eduardo was always talking about the importance of energy storage for renewable systems. He said the problem with most green energy was that you couldn't count on it being available when you needed it. Solar only works when the sun shines, wind only works when the air moves. But if you could store tidal energy efficiently, you'd have power available 24 hours a day, regardless of weather conditions, Tom finished. Exactly. And if that storage system can actually amplify the energy while it holds it, Frank paused, considering the implications. Tom, Eduardo might have solved the fundamental problem that's kept renewable energy from replacing fossil fuels entirely. As Tom reviewed Eduardo's journal that night, he found an entry that seemed to anticipate exactly what had happened. The young woman at the electronics shop has the kind of mind this work needs. She sees connections where others see only components, possibilities where others see only problems. When the time comes to move forward, she will be essential to success. Technical innovation requires not just knowledge, but the willingness to question what everyone knows to be true. Tom smiled, realizing that Eduardo had been planning this moment for years, identifying the people who would be needed to carry his work forward. Maya's involvement wasn't an accident, it was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure the technology would find its way into the right hands. Outside, the tide was coming in again, and Tom found himself calculating how much energy was flowing past the house with each wave. With Eduardo's generator to capture it and the crystalline storage system to hold it, that energy could power not just his own home, but potentially the entire waterfront district. For the first time since inheriting the house, Tom began to believe that Eduardo's vision wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The technology worked, the resources were available, and the team was coming together. All he needed now was the courage to move forward, despite the opposition he knew was coming. The weathered compass had been calling to Tom for days, its needle swaying in that hypnotic rhythm that seemed to respond to forces he couldn't identify. It wasn't until Maya suggested they take it down to the harbor that its true purpose became clear. Standing on the town pier at low tide, Tom held the compass and watched its needle stabilize, pointing not toward magnetic north, but toward a specific section of the harbor where the water moved with particular intensity. As the tide began to turn, the needle's movement became more pronounced, tracing patterns that corresponded exactly to the changing water flow. "It's not a compass at all," Maya said, studying the device's brass face more carefully. "It's a tidal flow indicator. See these markings around the edge? They're not compass points, they're measurements of water, velocity, and direction." Hidden beneath the compass's glass face, Tom discovered a collection of charts that Eduardo had drawn with painstaking detail. Each chart mapped different sections of Harbor Point's waterfront, showing the precise patterns of tidal flow throughout the lunar cycle. Some areas showed relatively gentle water movement, while others indicated powerful currents that could generate substantial energy. Eduardo mapped the entire harbor, Tom said, spreading the charts on the pier's weathered planks. He identified every location where the tidal flow was strong enough to support energy generation. The charts revealed the sophisticated thinking behind Eduardo's system design. Rather than trying to capture tidal energy with a single large installation, he had planned a distributed network of smaller generators positioned at optimal locations throughout the harbor. Each unit would be sized and configured for its specific location, maximizing energy capture while minimizing environmental impact. "Look at this," Maya pointed to a chart showing the area directly in front of Eduardo's house. "He's marked this as the primary installation site. The tidal flow here is almost twice as strong as anywhere else in the harbor." Frank, who had joined them for the harbor survey, nodded knowingly. Eduardo used to say the house was built in exactly the right spot, not just for the view, but for the water flow. The way the harbour bottom slopes here, it creates a natural acceleration zone for the tidal current. Tom studied the hydrographic details Eduardo had included in his charts. The seafloor topography around the house created a kind of underwater funnel that concentrated the tidal flow, making it an ideal location for energy generation. Eduardo hadn't inherited a random piece of waterfront property. He had specifically chosen a location that offered maximum potential for his tidal energy system. These calculations, Maya said, examining the detailed notes that accompanied each chart. They're incredibly sophisticated. Eduardo wasn't just measuring water flow, was modeling the entire harbour as an energy system, calculating optimal placement for maximum efficiency. The numbers were impressive. According to Eduardo's projections, a properly designed tidal energy network could generate enough electricity to power Harbour Point's entire residential district, with surplus capacity for commercial and municipal needs. The system would be completely renewable, utterly reliable, and virtually maintenance-free once installed. Maya, what would it take to actually build something like this? Tom asked. The engineering is straightforward. Eduardo's already solved the hard problems. The challenge would be manufacturing, installation, and grid integration. Maya paused, calculating. For a harbour this size, you'd probably need 30 to 40 generator units, plus the storage and distribution infrastructure. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar project. Tom felt his excitement deflate slightly. Even if Eduardo's technology was revolutionary, the capital requirements were far beyond anything he could manage. His unemployment benefits had run out, his savings were nearly exhausted, and his only asset was a house that most people considered worthless. However, Maya continued, if you could prove the technology works with a single, large-scale demonstration, you could probably attract the kind of investment needed for full implementation. Renewable energy investors are always looking for breakthrough technologies. What kind of demonstration? Power the house, Frank suggested. If you could install a scaled-up version of Eduardo's system and actually run your household off tidal energy, that would be pretty convincing proof of concept. Tom looked at the charts again, focusing on the area directly in front of the house. According to Eduardo's measurements, the tidal flow there was sufficient to generate several times more power than a typical household used. A successful demonstration could prove the technology's viability while solving his own energy costs. How big would the demonstration unit need to be? Maya consulted Eduardo's scaling calculations. Based on his projections, something about the size of a small boat motor. The housing would be maybe 4 feet tall, designed to mount on existing pier pilings or seawall supports, completely unobtrusive, but big enough to generate real power. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David Sterling, a man in his 40s, wearing expensive casual clothes that somehow managed to look both professional and relaxed. He approached the group with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. But his expression carried the slightly haunted quality of someone who'd recently learned humility the hard way. "Excuse me," Sterling said, extending his hand to Tom. "David Sterling, I couldn't help but notice your discussion about renewable energy systems. I have some experience in that area, and I'm wondering if you might be interested in talking." Tom accepted the handshake cautiously. Sterling's appearance and demeanor suggested money and influence, exactly the kind of person who might be connected to Marcus Crane's development interests. "What kind of experience?" Frank asked, his tone protective. "Venture capital, primarily. Clean technology investments." Sterling's smile was self-deprecating. "Though I should mention up front that my recent track record hasn't been stellar. I made some poor decisions about 18 months ago, trusted the wrong people, and ended up losing my investors a significant amount of money. The admission was unexpected. Most people in Sterling's position would have led with their successes, not their failures. I'm here because I'm looking for a chance to redeem myself," Sterling continued. "I moved to Harbour Point 6 months ago, partly to escape the aftermath of my mistakes, but mostly because I think small coastal communities like this are going to be the testing ground for the next generation of renewable energy technology. Maya studied Sterling with obvious skepticism. What makes you think that? Economics and necessity, Sterling replied. Large utility companies move slowly and resist change. They have too much invested in existing infrastructure to embrace truly disruptive technologies. But small communities facing economic decline, they're willing to take risks if the potential payoff is significant enough. Tom found himself intrigued despite his caution. What kind of risks? Adopting experimental technologies, serving as demonstration sites for innovations that haven't been proven at scale. Becoming early adopters in exchange for economic benefits. Sterling gestured toward the harbor. A place like Harbor Point could become completely energy, independent, using renewable sources, then sell surplus power to the regional grid. The revenue could transform the local economy. Assuming the technology actually works, Frank said dryly. Assuming that, yes. Sterling's attention focused on the charts spread across the pier. May I ask what you're working on? Tom hesitated, then decided that Sterling's frank admission of his failures had earned him some honesty in return. We're exploring tidal energy generation, trying to understand whether it's practical for local implementation. Sterling's expression shifted to genuine interest. Tidal energy is fascinating, completely predictable, environmentally benign, and vastly underutilized. He paused. May I ask what sparked your interest in the technology? My grandfather left me some research, Tom said carefully. We're trying to determine whether his ideas have commercial potential. Would you be willing to show me what you're working on? I might be able to offer some perspective on the business development side. Tom exchanged glances with Maya and Frank. Sterling's offer of business expertise was exactly what they needed, but his sudden appearance felt too convenient to be coincidental. Mr. Sterling, Tom said, are you connected in any way to Marcus Crane or his development company? Sterling's expression darkened. Marcus Crane is exactly the kind of person I'm trying to avoid working with. Short-sighted, profit-focused, and completely uninterested in anything that doesn't generate immediate returns. He met Tom's eyes directly. I assume he's been pressuring you to sell your property? He's made an offer, which I'm guessing was significantly below market value, with an artificially short deadline to prevent you from exploring other options. Sterling shook his head. Crane represents everything that's wrong with conventional development thinking. He sees a distressed property and assumes the only solution is demolition and replacement. And what do you see? Maya asked. Potential, a location with unique natural advantages, owned by someone with the technical background to understand those advantages, in a community that could benefit enormously from economic revitalization. Sterling gestured toward Eduardo's charts. If you've actually found a way to harness tidal energy efficiently, this property could be the center of something transformational. That afternoon, Tom made the decision to share Eduardo's work with Sterling. They spent 2 hours in the workshop, with Sterling examining the prototype generator, the crystalline storage device, and the detailed plans for harbor-wide implementation. His questions were informed and practical, focusing on manufacturability, scalability, and the regulatory challenges of grid integration. This is remarkable work, Sterling said finally. Your grandfather solved problems that have stymied renewable energy development for decades. The combination of efficient generation, advanced storage, and systematic site selection, it's exactly what the industry needs to make tidal energy commercially viable. But can it actually be built and deployed? Tom asked. Absolutely. The engineering is sound, the materials are available, and the market demand is enormous. Sterling paused, choosing his words carefully. However, you're going to face significant opposition. Existing energy companies, regulatory agencies, and local political interests that profit from the status quo, they're all going to try to prevent this technology from reaching the market. Like Marcus Crane. Crane is small time. The real opposition will come from larger interests who recognize the threat this represents to their business models. Sterling's expression was serious. Tom, If this technology works as advertised, it could make fossil fuel power plants obsolete in coastal regions. That's the kind of disruption that motivates very powerful people to take very aggressive action. As the sun began to set over Harbor Point, Tom found himself at a crossroads. Eduardo's technology offered the potential for financial security, environmental impact, and community transformation, everything he'd hoped for when he decided not to sell the house. But Sterling's warnings about opposition forces made clear that moving forward would require more than just technical expertise. "David," Tom said, "if we decided to build a demonstration system, what would we need to make it successful?" "Three things," Sterling replied. "Proof that the technology works at scale, protection from those who want to suppress it, and enough financial backing to move quickly before the opposition can organize. And you think you can help with those things?" Sterling smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "Tom, I've spent the last 18 months learning from my mistakes and planning my comeback. If you're willing to trust me with this opportunity, I promise you won't regret it." As they packed up Eduardo's charts and prepared to return to the house, Tom felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The compass had shown him where the energy was, the technology existed to capture it, and the team was assembling to make it happen. The only question remaining was whether he had the courage to commit fully to a path that would change everything. The sealed glass vial had been hidden in Eduardo's makeshift laboratory behind a collection of marine biology textbooks, and Tom might never have found it if not for Leah's systematic documentation project. His daughter had been photographing and cataloging Eduardo's work, creating a digital inventory that could help them understand the full scope of his research. "Dad, look at this," Leah said, holding up the vial to catch the afternoon light streaming through the laboratory window. "It's been glowing since I picked it up." The vial contained what appeared to be seawater with a faint green luminescence, as if someone had captured liquid starlight. As Tom watched, the glow pulsed gently, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that seemed almost organic. "It's responding to something," Maya observed, taking the vial and moving it to different positions around the laboratory. Near the window, overlooking the harbor, the luminescence grew noticeably brighter. Away from the water, it dimmed to barely perceptible levels. Eduardo's notes, carefully preserved alongside the vial, explained its purpose and cultivation. The luminescent algae were a specially developed strain of marine microorganisms that Eduardo had bred to respond to specific electromagnetic frequencies, the same frequencies generated by moving water in tidal flows. Day 892 of the algae project, Eduardo's journal entry read, "The organisms now show reliable response to tidal electromagnetic signatures. Brightness correlates directly with water velocity and energy potential. Natural biomonitoring system requires no external power and provides real-time feedback on optimal harvesting conditions." He created a living sensor system, Tom said, reading through more of Eduardo's research. "The algae glow brighter when the tidal conditions are perfect for energy generation." Maya was already conducting tests, using a small electromagnetic field generator to stimulate the algae. As she varied the frequency and intensity, the organism's glow changed correspondingly, creating a natural display that showed exactly when conditions were optimal for power generation. "This is brilliant," she said. "Instead of using electronic sensors that require power and maintenance, Eduardo developed a biological indicator that sustains itself and provides continuous monitoring. It's like having a living instrument panel for the tidal energy system." The implications were significant. With the luminescent algae providing real-time feedback, the tidal generators could be programmed to operate at peak efficiency, automatically adjusting their output to match the natural rhythms of the harbor. The system would be entirely self-regulating, requiring minimal human intervention. But the algae represented more than just technical innovation. They embodied Eduardo's holistic approach to renewable energy. Rather than fighting against natural systems, he had found ways to work with them, creating technology that enhanced rather than disrupted the marine environment. "Leah, show them the social media response," Tom said, remembering his daughter's latest project. Over the past week, Leah had been documenting their discoveries on various platforms, sharing videos of the prototype generator, the crystalline storage device, and now the luminescent algae. Her posts had started attracting attention from environmental groups, renewable energy enthusiasts, and science educators around the world. "We're up to 50,000 followers," Leah reported, scrolling through comments on her phone. "And look at some of these messages." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Environmental scientists were fascinated by Eduardo's integration of biological and mechanical systems. Engineering students were requesting detailed information about the tidal generator design. Several university researchers had reached out asking for collaboration opportunities. But the viral attention had also attracted less welcome interest. Leah showed them comments from what appeared to be coordinated accounts, all posting similar messages questioning the validity of the technology and suggesting that the family was running some kind of scam. "Classic disinformation campaign," Sterling said, examining the suspicious comments. "Someone is spending money to discredit your work before it gains too much traction." "Who would do that?" Leah asked. "Anyone whose business model depends on keeping alternative energy technologies from reaching the market," Sterling replied. "Oil companies, traditional utilities, political interests that profit from energy dependence." Tom felt a chill of recognition. Marcus Crane's pressure to sell the property suddenly made more sense if there were larger interests, involved interests that knew about Eduardo's work and wanted to ensure it never became public. "David, how do we protect ourselves from that kind of attack?" "Documentation, transparency, and moving fast," Sterling said. "The more public your work becomes, the harder it is for opponents to suppress it quietly. But you also need to be prepared for escalation." As if summoned by their conversation, Tom's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mr. Reyes, this is Marcus Crane. I hope you've had time to reconsider my offer. I'm calling because there have been some developments that might affect your decision." Tom put the phone on speaker so the others could hear. "What kind of developments?" "The town council has scheduled an emergency session for tomorrow evening. There are concerns about potential environmental hazards at your property, reports of unusual electromagnetic activity, possible contamination from industrial chemicals, that sort of thing." "That's ridiculous. There are no environmental hazards here." "I'm sure you're right," Crane said smoothly. "But investigations can be time-consuming and expensive, the kind of thing that could tie up a property for months or even years while regulatory agencies conduct their studies." The threat was clear. If Tom didn't sell, Crane and his allies would use bureaucratic obstacles to make the property unusable and unsaleable. "However," Crane continued, "my clients are still interested in purchasing the property as is, without requiring environmental clearance. We could close by the end of the week, before any regulatory complications arise." "I'm not interested in selling," Tom said firmly. "I hope you'll reconsider. These regulatory processes can be quite unpleasant, especially for someone without the resources to fight them properly." Crane's tone remained polite, but the underlying menace was unmistakable. "I'll be in touch tomorrow after the council meeting." After Crane hung up, the group sat in silence, absorbing the implications of the conversation. "They're escalating," Sterling said. "Crane's backers have decided that subtle pressure isn't working, so they're moving to more aggressive tactics." "Can they really shut us down with environmental investigations?" Tom asked. "If they have the right political connections, absolutely. Environmental regulations can be used as weapons against projects that threaten established interests." Sterling's expression was grim. "I've seen it happen before." Maya looked up from her phone, where she'd been researching local political connections. "The mayor of Harbor Point used to work for a regional utility company. 2 of the 5 town council members have financial ties to energy sector investments." "So tomorrow's emergency meeting isn't about environmental protection," Frank said. "It's about protecting certain people's financial interests." Tom felt the weight of opposition settling around them like fog. Eduardo's revolutionary technology represented hope for energy independence and environmental progress, but it also threatened powerful interests that would fight to maintain the status quo. "What do we do?" Leah asked. Sterling was quiet for a moment, calculating options. "We accelerate the timeline. Instead of taking months to build a demonstration system, we build it in days. We get the technology working publicly before they can stop us." "Is that even possible?" Tom asked. "With Eduardo's detailed plans and the three of us working together, yes," Maya said. "The prototype proves the concept works. We just need to scale it up and install it." Frank nodded slowly. "I've got a workshop full of marine equipment and 40 years of experience building things that work in salt water. If you can handle the electrical engineering, I can handle the mechanical construction. And I can handle the business and political challenges," Sterling added. "But we need to move fast. Once that town council meeting happens tomorrow, we'll be fighting regulatory battles instead of building energy systems." As evening approached, Tom made the decision that would define everything that followed. They would build the demonstration system immediately, working through the night, if necessary, to have a functioning tidal generator installed and operating before Crane's political allies could interfere. "Eduardo spent years preparing for this moment," Tom said, looking around at the team that had assembled to carry forward his grandfather's work. "He gave us the technology, identified the right people, and even provided the biological monitoring system to ensure optimal performance. He picked up the vial of luminescent algae, watching as they pulsed with soft green light in response to the harbor's electromagnetic signature. Tomorrow, we show Harbor Point what the future of energy looks like. And we prove that Eduardo Reyes wasn't just an eccentric inventor, he was a visionary who understood what the world needed before anyone else was ready to listen." Outside, the tide was turning, and the algae in their vial glowed brighter as the water began to move with renewed purpose. The harbor was ready. The technology was proven. The only question remaining was whether they could move fast enough to stay ahead of the forces arrayed against them. The hidden steel vault revealed itself only when Tom used the final key on Eduardo's Ringen ornate brass key that had seemed too large and elaborate for any ordinary lock. He found the vault's entrance behind what appeared to be a solid wall in the basement workshop, but which swung open on perfectly balanced hinges to reveal a space that Eduardo had clearly designed as his most important repository. The vault was larger than Tom had expected, roughly the size of a walk-in closet, with steel-lined walls and a sophisticated climate control system that had kept its contents perfectly preserved. But it was the contents themselves that made Tom's breath catch in his throat. The walls were covered with technical drawings, unlike anything Tom had seen in Eduardo's other work. These weren't sketches or experimental designs, they were complete engineering blueprints for a massive tidal energy network that could power entire cities. The drawings showed installation layouts, grid integration specifications, and manufacturing details for generator units, far more sophisticated than the prototype Tom had discovered. "Maya, Sterling, Frank, you need to see this," Tom called, his voice echoing in the vault's steel-lined space. As the team assembled in the vault, Tom began to understand the true scope of Eduardo's vision. The blueprints covered not just Harbor Point, but coastal installations that could span hundreds of miles. The system was designed to be modular and scalable, capable of powering everything from small communities to major metropolitan areas. "These calculations," Maya said, studying a blueprint that detailed power distribution networks, "they're showing energy output that could replace multiple conventional power plants." Eduardo wasn't just thinking about making Harbor Point energy independent, was designing a technology that could transform the entire eastern seaboard. But it was Sterling who made the connection that changed everything. As he examined a particular set of blueprints, his expression shifted from admiration to recognition to something approaching shock. "I've seen these designs before," he said quietly. "Not exactly the same, but very similar. About 8 years ago, I was consulting on a Department of Defense renewable energy project. The Navy was developing advanced power systems for coastal installations and submarine bases. Tom looked up from the documents he'd been studying. What kind of power systems? Classified tidal energy technology. The Navy had figured out how to generate massive amounts of power from relatively small tidal installations, but the project was shut down abruptly. Sterling paused, studying Eduardo's blueprints more carefully. The official reason was budget constraints, but there were rumors that the technology was too advanced, too disruptive to existing energy markets. Maya found a folder containing what appeared to be correspondence between Eduardo and various government agencies. The letters, dating back over a decade, revealed a complex relationship between Eduardo's work and official military research programs. Eduardo wasn't just a retired Navy engineer, Maya said, reading through the correspondence. He was the lead designer on the military's tidal energy project. These blueprints, they're not just inspired by classified technology, they are classified technology. The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. His grandfather hadn't been working independently to develop tidal energy system. She had been the original inventor of the technology that the military had tried to suppress. When the Navy shut down the project, Eduardo had continued the work privately, using his own resources to perfect systems that the government had deemed too dangerous to pursue. That explains the legal troubles Frank mentioned. Sterling said, Eduardo wasn't fighting patent disputes with oil companies. He was fighting the federal government over technology they claimed was classified. Tom found more documentation that confirmed Sterling's assessment. Eduardo had spent 3 years in legal battles, not with corporate interests, but with Defense Department lawyers, who claimed his work violated national security protocols. The case had been settled quietly, with Eduardo agreeing to cease commercial development in exchange for being allowed to continue private research. But the most shocking discovery came in a sealed envelope marked, "For my grandson." Inside, Tom found a letter in Eduardo's handwriting that explained everything. Thomas, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found the vault. What you now know puts you in considerable danger, but it also gives you the power to change the world. The technology in these blueprints is not just revolutionary, it is suppressed. 8 years ago, I solved the fundamental problems of large-scale tidal energy generation while working for the Navy's Advanced Energy Research Division. The system I developed could provide clean, renewable power to every coastal city in America, making both nuclear plants and fossil fuel installations obsolete. When I attempted to transition this work to civilian applications, I discovered that certain interests, both governmental and corporate, preferred that such technology remained classified and unavailable. I was forced to choose between abandoning the work entirely or continuing it in secret, preparing for a time when the world would be ready to accept what I had created. The house you have inherited is more than a family home. It is a research facility designed specifically to develop and test this technology away from official oversight. Every device you have found, every component you have tested, is part of a complete system that can generate enough power to make Harbor Point completely energy independent while demonstrating the viability of much larger installations. But you must understand the risks. The same forces that prevented this technology from reaching the market 8 years ago are still active today. They will use any means necessary, legal, financial, political, to prevent you from succeeding where I was forced to stop. However, the world has changed since my original work. Social media, environmental awareness, and economic pressures have created an opportunity that did not exist before. If you can demonstrate this technology publicly and build sufficient support before the opposition can organize, you may succeed where I failed. Trust your team carefully. The young woman at the electronics shop has the technical skills you need. The boat builder next door has the practical experience to manufacture components. The disgraced investor who will approach you has learned from his mistakes and understands the political challenges you will face. Most importantly, trust your daughter. She has inherited the family gift for seeing possibilities where others see only problems. Her ability to communicate your work to the world will be essential to your success. The final component you need is courage. This technology can power the future, but only if someone is willing to fight for that future against those who profit from the past. Make me proud, grandson. Finish what I started. The letter was signed with Eduardo's full name and dated just 3 months before his death. Tom looked around the vault, seeing it now not as a hidden repository, but as a command center that Eduardo had prepared for exactly this moment. The blueprints weren't just designs, they were battle plans for a war against energy scarcity and environmental destruction. He knew, Tom said quietly. Eduardo knew exactly what would happen. He planned for Marcus Crane's pressure, for the government interference, even for the specific people who would help us. The question is, Sterling said, what do we do with this knowledge? If Eduardo's right about the opposition we're facing, building a simple demonstration system won't be enough. We'll need to go public in a way that makes suppression impossible. Maya was studying the blueprints with renewed understanding. These designs aren't just for tidal generators, they're for a complete energy infrastructure revolution. If we can prove this technology works, it doesn't just solve Harbor Point's energy needs, it obsoletes every fossil fuel power plant on the eastern seaboard. Frank, who had been silent throughout the discoveries, finally spoke. Eduardo was protecting more than just an invention. He was protecting the future. The question is whether we're brave enough to claim it. As they stood in Eduardo's vault, surrounded by the evidence of his vision and sacrifice, Tom felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His grandfather had given him more than a house, and some interesting gadgetry had given him the tools to change the world, and the knowledge that powerful forces would try to stop him. Tomorrow's emergency town council meeting wasn't just about environmental regulations or property development. It was about whether Eduardo's vision of a clean energy future would finally be allowed to emerge, or whether it would be buried once again by those who profited from scarcity and pollution. The steel vault had revealed the truth. This wasn't just a story about a man inheriting his grandfather's house. It was a story about inheriting the responsibility to complete a revolution that had been decades in the making. Eduardo's final letter to Tom contained more than just explanation. It contained the missing piece that would make everything work. Hidden within the personal message was a technical specification that solved the last remaining challenge of large-scale tidal energy generation: synchronization. Look at this section, Maya said, pointing to a paragraph that seemed to be written in a different tone than the rest of the letter. Eduardo's describing how multiple tidal generators can be linked to operate as a unified system, amplifying each other's output through harmonic resonance. The concept was elegant and revolutionary. Instead of operating independently, Eduardo's generators could be synchronized to create constructive interference patterns in their electromagnetic fields. When properly tuned, a network of generators would produce significantly more power than the sum of their individual outputs, a phenomenon that violated conventional understanding of energy, conservation, but made perfect sense within Eduardo's holistic approach to natural systems. It's like a choir, Tom said, studying his grandfather's diagrams. Individual voices combining to create something more powerful than any single singer could achieve alone. Sterling was already calculating the business implications. If this synchronization effect works as described, a properly configured tidal energy network wouldn't just be competitive with fossil fuel plants, it would be dramatically more efficient. The economic advantages would be overwhelming. But implementing Eduardo's vision would require more than just technical understanding. The team faced 3 immediate challenges: proving the technology worked at scale, protecting it from suppression, and securing the resources needed for rapid deployment. "We need patents," Sterling said, reviewing Eduardo's documentation. "The original military research is classified, but Eduardo's civilian innovations can be protected if we file properly." "How long does that take?" Tom asked. "Normally, months or years, but there are expedited processes for breakthrough technologies, especially ones with national security implications," Sterling paused. I have contacts at the patent office who specialize in energy innovations. If we can demonstrate that the technology works and document its potential impact, we might be able to secure provisional protection within days. Maya was focused on the technical challenges. To build a synchronization demonstration, we'll need at least 3 generator units operating simultaneously. That means scaling up Eduardo's prototype by a factor of 10 and coordinating their installation. Can we do that before tomorrow's town council meeting? Tom asked. If we work through the night and use every resource we have available, yes. Maya's expression was determined. But it will require perfect coordination and no technical failures. Frank had been studying the installation requirements. I've got the equipment to mount the generators on the existing pier supports. The harbor bottom is solid enough to handle the anchoring loads, and the tidal flow patterns are exactly what Eduardo's designs called for. As the afternoon progressed, the team divided into specialized roles. Sterling began the patent filing process, working with his legal contacts to document Eduardo's innovations and protect them from appropriation. Maya started manufacturing the synchronization components, using Eduardo's workshop and her own collection of salvaged electronics. Frank prepared the mechanical installation equipment, adapting his boat-building tools for underwater construction work. Tom found himself coordinating the overall effort while grappling with the emotional weight of Eduardo's final message. His grandfather had not just anticipated this momentha, had orchestrated it, identifying each team member and preparing them for their specific roles in bringing his vision to reality. "Leah," Tom said, finding his daughter documenting the preparation work with her phone, "your great-grandfather knew you would be essential to this project. He wrote about your ability to communicate with the world." "What does that mean?" "It means when we demonstrate this technology tomorrow, the world needs to see it, not just the town council, but everyone who cares about clean energy and environmental progress." Tom paused. Eduardo believed that public awareness would be our best protection against suppression. Leah nodded, understanding immediately. Live streaming, social media engagement, real-time documentation that can't be buried or hidden. "Exactly. Can you make that happen?" "Dad, I can make it go viral before the demonstration even starts." As evening approached, the team faced their first major technical challenge. The synchronization system required precise calibration of electromagnetic frequencies, but Eduardo's notes used measurement standards that predated modern digital equipment. "He's referring to harmonic ratios based on tidal rhythms," Maya said, frustration evident in her voice. "But how do we translate third harmonic of the harbor's breathing frequency into actual electrical specifications?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Tom remembered the luminescent algae and their response to tidal electromagnetic signatures. When Maya connected the biological sensors to her frequency measurement equipment, they provided the exact reference points that Eduardo's synchronization system required. The algae are living calibration devices, Tom realized. Eduardo designed them to provide the frequency standards needed for synchronization. With the biological reference system in place, Maya was able to configure the 3 generator units for harmonic operation. Each unit would operate at a slightly different frequency, but the frequencies would be mathematically related in ways that created constructive interference and amplified total power output. Meanwhile, Sterling's patent research had revealed both encouraging and disturbing information. Eduardo's civilian innovations were indeed patentable and potentially valuable, but there were also indications that certain government agencies were actively monitoring patent applications related to tidal energy technology. "We're going to attract official attention whether we want it or not," Sterling reported. "The question is whether we can build enough public support to prevent suppression." "What kind of public support?" Frank asked. "Media coverage, political backing, economic interest from legitimate investors. If this technology can demonstrate clear benefits for environmental protection and economic development, it becomes much harder for opponents to suppress it quietly." As the team worked through the night, Tom found himself thinking about the broader implications of their project. Eduardo's tidal energy system represented more than just an alternative to fossil fuels. It offered a path toward genuine energy independence for coastal communities throughout the world. But independence threatened those who profited from dependence. Tomorrow's demonstration would determine whether Eduardo's vision could overcome decades of entrenched interests and suppressed innovation. "Tom," Maya called from her workstation, where she was making final adjustments to the synchronization control system. "I need you to test the biological frequency response one more time." Tom carefully activated the algae sensors, watching as they glowed in response to the harbor's electromagnetic signature. The living indicators pulsed with gentle green light, confirming that the tidal conditions were optimal for energy generation. "Everything's ready," Maya announced. "The generators are calibrated, the synchronization system is functional, and the monitoring equipment is operational." Frank had completed the installation preparation, with mounting hardware ready for deployment and all mechanical systems tested and verified. Sterling finished uploading the final patent documentation, establishing a legal timestamp that would protect Eduardo's innovations regardless of what happened with the demonstration. "There's one more thing," Sterling said, his expression serious. "I've been monitoring local political communications, and tomorrow's town council meeting isn't going to be a normal regulatory discussion. Marcus Crane has arranged for what appears to be a coordinated effort to shut down any further development on your property." "What kind of coordinated effort?" "Environmental lawyers, regulatory officials, possibly federal agents, if they can claim national security concerns." Sterling paused. "They're planning to hit us with every legal and bureaucratic obstacle available." Tom felt the weight of opposition gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Eduardo had warned him that powerful forces would resist the technology, but the reality of that resistance was more comprehensive than he'd imagined. "Then we make sure the demonstration is so compelling, so publicly visible, that suppression becomes impossible," Tom said. "Eduardo gave us the tools. Tomorrow, we use them." As dawn approached, the team made final preparations for what would either be Eduardo's vindication or the final burial of his revolutionary vision. The harbor stretched before them, its ancient tidal rhythms unchanged by human politics or corporate interests. Somewhere in that rhythm lay the power to transform the world. In a few hours, they would find out whether they had the courage and skill to capture it. The synchronized tidal array became reality at precisely 7:43 a.m., when Frank's boat lowered the third and final generator unit into position beneath the pier. The 3 units, each standing 4 feet tall and gleaming with fresh marine paint, looked deceptively simple as they settled into the tidal flow that Eduardo had mapped with such precision. "Synchronization test in 3, 2, 1. Maya announced from her control station on the pier, as dozens of spectators gathered to watch the demonstration. Word of the test had spread through Harbor Point overnight, carried by Leah's social media campaign and the kind of small-town curiosity that made extraordinary events into community celebrations. Local residents mixed with visiting reporters, environmental activists who had driven in from regional cities, and a handful of officials whose presence suggested that Sterling's warnings about coordinated opposition were proving accurate. Tom watched the voltage displays as Maya activated the synchronization protocol. The first generator came online with a steady hum, producing a baseline power output that matched Eduardo's projections. The second unit, activated 30 seconds later, its frequency precisely calibrated to create harmonic reinforcement with the first. But it was the third generator that would prove or disprove Eduardo's most revolutionary claim. As it came online and the synchronization system engaged all 3 units, the power output didn't just triplete, increased by nearly 5 times the baseline measurement. "It's working," Maya said, her voice carrying a mixture of amazement and scientific satisfaction. "The harmonic amplification effect is real. We're generating enough power to light up the entire waterfront district." As if to prove her point, Tom activated the demonstration loader series of high-intensity LED arrays that had been installed along the harbor's walking path. The lights blazed to life with brilliant white illumination, transforming the grey morning into something approaching daylight celebration. The crowd's response was immediate and electric. Applause erupted from the gathered residents, while reporters began speaking rapidly into their cameras and phones. Leah moved through the crowd with her live-stream equipment, capturing reactions and explanations that were being viewed by thousands of people around the world. But Tom's attention was drawn to a group of men in dark suits who had positioned themselves near the pier's entrance. Their presence felt official and unwelcome, and their expressions suggested they were documenting the demonstration for purposes that had nothing to do with celebrating technological breakthrough. "Tom," Sterling said quietly, appearing at his elbow, "we have a problem. Marcus Crane just arrived with what appears to be a full legal team." Tom looked toward the parking area and saw Crane emerging from a black SUV, followed by several individuals carrying briefcases and official-looking documents. Behind them, a second vehicle disgorged what appeared to be federal agentsmen and women with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement officials. "Are they here to shut us down?" Tom asked. "They're going to try, but they'll have a harder time now that the demonstration is being broadcast live to a global audience." As if on cue, one of the federal agents approached the control station where Maya was monitoring the synchronized array. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the Department of Energy. We need you to shut down this equipment immediately." Maya looked to Tom, who stepped forward to respond. "On what grounds?" "This technology may be in violation of federal regulations regarding energy generation and grid integration. We're conducting an investigation and need to secure the equipment as potential evidence." Tom felt his heart racing, but Sterling stepped smoothly into the conversation. "Agent Rodriguez, I assume you have a warrant for equipment seizure. Because this is private property, and this is a legal demonstration of privately developed technology." The agent's expression suggested he hadn't expected legal pushback. "We're conducting a preliminary investigation. The warrant paperwork is being processed. Then you'll need to wait for the proper legal authority before interfering with this demonstration," Sterling replied firmly. "Until then, these citizens have every right to test their own equipment on their own property." Meanwhile, the synchronized array continued to operate flawlessly, generating power that kept the LED demonstration blazing, while the luminescent algae provided real-time confirmation that the system was working in perfect harmony with the harbor's natural rhythms. Marcus Crane pushed through the crowd, his expensive suit and aggressive demeanor creating a stark contrast to the community atmosphere of the demonstration. "Tom, this has gone far enough. You're creating a public safety hazard with untested equipment." "The equipment is thoroughly tested," Tom replied, "and it's generating clean, renewable energy without any environmental impact. You don't have permits for energy generation, you don't have environmental clearances, you're operating outside every regulatory framework that exists to protect public safety." Tom was about to respond when Leah's voice cut through the tension. "Dad, you need to see this. The live stream is going viral. We've got over 100,000 viewers, and the numbers are climbing fast." Tom looked at his daughter's phone screen, which showed real-time viewer counts and comment streams from around the world. Environmental groups were sharing the feed, renewable energy advocates were providing technical commentary, and news organizations were picking up the story for broader coverage. "The whole world is watching," Leah said, her excitement evident. "People are calling this the breakthrough that proves tidal energy can work at scale." Agent Rodriguez spoke into his radio, clearly receiving instructions from his superiors. When he finished the conversation, his expression had shifted from confident authority to uncertain frustration. "Agent Rodriguez," Sterling said, "I think you'll find that attempting to suppress this demonstration now would create more problems than allowing it to continue. The technology is legal, the installation is on private property, and the public interest in renewable energy innovation makes this a very high-profile situation." The agent hesitated, clearly weighing the political implications of shutting down a successful clean energy demonstration that was being watched by thousands of people around the world. Tom seized the moment of uncertainty. "Agent Rodriguez, instead of viewing this as a threat, why don't you consider it as an opportunity? This technology could transform coastal energy production throughout the United States. Shouldn't the Department of Energy be interested in supporting innovation rather than suppressing it?" As the morning progressed, the synchronized array proved its reliability and efficiency. The power output remained steady and strong, the environmental monitoring showed no negative impacts, and the global audience continued to grow as the story spread through social media and news networks. But Tom knew that the real test was still to come. The town council meeting that evening would determine whether Eduardo's vision could survive the coordinated opposition that had been building for months. The signed partnership agreement that would determine the future of Eduardo's technology came together in the most unlikely location, the Harbor Point Community Center, where the emergency town council meeting had drawn the largest crowd in the building's history. Tom arrived to find the parking lot overflowing and people streaming in from the street. The morning's demonstration had generated such widespread interest that the council had been forced to move the meeting to accommodate the crowd. Local residents mixed with reporters, environmental activists, and what appeared to be representatives from several major energy companies. Marcus Crane had positioned himself near the front of the room with his legal team, while Agent Rodriguez and his federal colleagues occupied a section that gave them clear sightlines to all exits. The atmosphere felt charged with the kind of tension that preceded either breakthrough or catastrophe. "Before we begin," announced Mayor Patricia Wells, a woman in her 60s whose nervous demeanor suggested she hadn't expected to be presiding over a meeting of this magnitude, "I want to establish that this is a municipal council session focused on local regulatory issues, not a federal hearing or corporate negotiation." Tom recognized the mayor's attempt to maintain control over a situation that had clearly exceeded her expectations. But Sterling had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Your Honor," Sterling said, standing to address the council, "with respect, the technology demonstrated this morning has implications that extend far beyond local regulatory concerns. We'd like to propose a different approach to tonight's discussion." "What kind of approach?" Mayor Wells asked. "Instead of focusing on restrictions and limitations, we'd like to present a partnership opportunity that could benefit Harbor Point, the region, and the broader renewable energy sector." Sterling gestured to Maya, who activated a presentation system that projected Eduardo's harbor-wide energy network design onto the wall behind the council table. The blueprints showed how a complete tidal energy installation could power not just the waterfront district, but the entire town, with surplus capacity for regional grid contribution. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling continued, "what you saw this morning was a proof of concept. What we're proposing tonight is a complete transformation of Harbor Point's energy infrastructure that would make this community a model for renewable energy independence." The economic projections were compelling. A harbor-wide tidal energy network would generate enough surplus power to provide substantial revenue through regional grid sales. The installation would create local jobs, attract research and development investment, and position Harbor Point as a leader in clean energy innovation. But the presentation was interrupted by Marcus Crane, who stood to address the council with obvious agitation. "This is exactly the kind of reckless development that the town needs to prevent. We're talking about unproven technology, massive construction projects, and potential environmental disasters." "Mr. Crane," Tom said, rising to respond, "the technology was thoroughly proven this morning. The environmental impact is minimal and the economic benefits are substantial." "According to who? An unemployed solar panel installer and a disgraced venture capitalist?" Crane's tone was dismissive. "The town council has a responsibility to protect residents from speculative schemes that could leave them worse off than they started." The debate that followed revealed the deeper tensions that had been building throughout Harbor Point's economic decline. Residents who supported the energy project saw it as a path toward revitalization and independence. Those aligned with Crane's development interests preferred the safety of conventional approaches, even if those approaches offered limited prospects for improvement. But the dynamics shifted when Maya began documenting real-time energy production data from the synchronized array, which had continued operating throughout the day. The numbers were unequivocal. Eduardo's system was generating exactly the power output that his calculations had predicted, with perfect reliability and no environmental complications. The system has been operating for 12 hours, Maya reported. Power output has remained steady, environmental monitors show no negative impacts, and the total energy generated could have powered 50 homes for the entire day. Agent Rodriguez, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. Ms. Chen, what assurances can you provide that this technology doesn't incorporate classified military research? All components are built from commercially available materials using techniques that are documented in public literature, Maya replied. The innovations are in the combination and optimization, not in any restricted technologies. Sterling stepped forward with a folder of documents. Agent Rodriguez, we've prepared complete technical documentation, including patent applications that demonstrate the civilian nature of all innovations. The Department of Energy is welcome to review our work, but they'll find nothing that violates security protocols. The agent accepted the documentation, but his expression suggested the federal investigation would continue regardless of what the local council decided. It was then that the most unexpected support came from an entirely surprising source. Eleanor Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had befriended Eduardo, stood to address the council with quiet authority. I've lived next to Eduardo Reyes for 15 years, she said. I watched him work on these projects, helped him test some of his devices, and listened to him explain his vision for what Harbor Point could become. The room grew quiet as Eleanor continued. Eduardo wasn't just inventing technology, he was trying to give this community a future. He saw what the rest of us were too afraid to imagine, that a small coastal town could lead the world in something important. Eleanor's endorsement carried weight precisely because she had no obvious stake in the outcome. Her support helped shift the community discussion from skepticism to possibility, creating space for council members to consider the partnership proposal seriously. Mrs. Henderson, Mayor Wells said, "What would you recommend the council do?" "I'd recommend they trust Eduardo's grandson to finish what Eduardo started. And I'd recommend they think about what Harbor Point could be, instead of just what it has been." The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Tom had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. By a margin of 3-2, the Harbor Point Town Council approved a public-private partnership that would allow Tom and his team to develop a complete tidal energy network while ensuring community ownership of the infrastructure and shared benefits from the revenue. The partnership agreement included environmental protections, community oversight, and provisions for technology transfer that would allow other coastal communities to implement similar systems. Most importantly, it established Harbor Point as a demonstration site for large-scale tidal energy implementation, attracting the kind of research and investment attention that could transform the local economy. As the meeting concluded, and the crowd dispersed, Tom found himself surrounded by reporters, investors, and engineers who wanted to understand more about Eduardo's technology. But it was the quiet conversation with Agent Rodriguez that proved most significant. "Mr. Reyes," the agent said, "the Department of Energy will be conducting a thorough review of your technology and its relationship to classified research. However, given the public interest and the potential benefits for renewable energy development, that review will focus on support rather than suppression." "What does that mean?" "It means your grandfather's work may finally get the recognition and support it deserved 8 years ago. The world has changed, and so have the government's priorities regarding clean energy innovation." As Tom walked home through the Harbor Point streets, now illuminated by power generated from Eduardo's tidal array, He felt the weight of the past few weeks settling into satisfaction and hope. The partnership agreement represented more than just a business deal. It was a validation of Eduardo's vision and a commitment to the kind of future he had imagined. The Victorian mansion stood before him, no longer a burden or a curiosity, but the headquarters of a revolutionary energy company that would carry his grandfather's legacy into a new era of environmental progress and community prosperity. Eduardo's restored workshop had become a living laboratory, where the next generation of renewable energy innovators gathered to push the boundaries of what was possible. 6 months after the town council meeting that changed everything, the basement space buzzed with activity that would have made the old inventor proud. Tom stood in the doorway, watching Maya lead a team of graduate students through the intricacies of tidal energy synchronization, while Frank supervised the construction of generator components using techniques that blended traditional craftsmanship with cutting-edge engineering. The workshop had expanded into the house's first floor, creating a seamless flow between research, development, and manufacturing that embodied Eduardo's vision of integrated innovation. The transformation of Harbour Point had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The harbour-wide tidal energy network now generated enough power to make the town completely energy independent, with surplus capacity that provided substantial revenue through regional grid sales. More importantly, the success had attracted other renewable energy companies, research institutions, and environmental organizations, transforming the dying fishing village into a thriving center of clean technology innovation. "Dad, the latest production numbers are incredible," Leah said, approaching with a tablet full of energy output data. At 18, his daughter had become the company's director of communications, using her social media expertise to share Harbour Point's success story with communities around the world. "We're generating 30% more power than Eduardo's original projections, and the environmental monitoring shows the marine ecosystem is actually healthier than it was before the installation." Tom smiled, remembering his grandfather's belief that properly designed technology should enhance rather than disrupt natural systems. The tidal generators had created artificial reef structures that supported marine life, while the energy production had eliminated the town's dependence on fossil fuel power plants. The financial transformation had been equally dramatic. Tom's share of the technology licensing agreements had generated the $200 million that the story's title had promised, but more importantly, the success had created opportunities for the entire community. Former fishing families had found work in generator manufacturing and maintenance. Young people who had planned to leave Harbour Point for economic opportunities were staying to pursue careers in renewable energy. The town's population had grown by 40% as engineers, researchers, and entrepreneurs relocated to participate in the clean energy revolution. Maya had evolved from a brilliant technician into a respected leader in the renewable energy field, heading a research team that was developing the next generation of tidal energy systems. Her work on bio-integrated monitoring systems had attracted attention from environmental groups worldwide, and she regularly consulted with communities interested in implementing Eduardo's technology. Frank had found new purpose as the head of manufacturing for Tidal Energy Systems, the company that Tom and Sterling had formed to commercialize Eduardo's innovations. His decades of boat-building experience had proven invaluable for creating generator components that could withstand marine environments while maintaining the precision that Eduardo's designs required. Sterling had successfully redeemed his reputation through his role in bringing Eduardo's technology to market. His understanding of both the technical challenges and the political obstacles had been essential to navigating the complex process of commercializing breakthrough technology. More importantly, he had structured the business arrangements to ensure that communities like Harbour Point shared in the benefits of the innovation, rather than simply serving as testing grounds for corporate profit. "Tom, you have a visitor," Frank called from the workshop entrance. Tom looked up to see Agent Rodriguez, but the federal investigator's demeanor had changed completely from their confrontational first meeting. Instead of suspicion and concern, Rodriguez projected the professional respect accorded to successful innovators whose work served national interests. "Mr. Reyes," Rodriguez said, "I wanted to update you on the Department of Energy's review of your technology. The official finding is that Eduardo's innovations represent significant advances in renewable energy that align perfectly with current federal priorities for energy independence and environmental protection." What does that mean practically? It means the government wants to support rather than suppress this technology. We're prepared to offer research grants, regulatory assistance, and support for international deployment of tidal energy systems. Rodriguez paused. It also means Eduardo's security clearance issues have been resolved posthumously. His service to the country is now properly recognized. Tom felt a surge of satisfaction on his grandfather's behalf. Eduardo had been vindicated, not just technically, but personally, with his reputation restored and his vision embraced by the same institutions that had once opposed his work. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, researchers from universities around the world, representatives from coastal communities interested in implementing tidal energy systems, and entrepreneurs seeking to develop related technologies. The Victorian mansion had become an unexpected center of international attention, hosting conferences and collaborations that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. But it was the quiet moment at sunset that meant the most to Tom. As the day's activities wound down and the workshop grew peaceful, he found himself in Eduardo's restored study, surrounded by the journals, charts, and instruments that had guided his grandfather's life work. Leah joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had found her place in the world. "Do you think great-grandfather would be proud of what we've accomplished?" she asked. Tom considered the question, looking around the study that had become both a shrine to Eduardo's memory and a planning center for the future. "I think he'd be amazed by how far we've taken his work, but I don't think he'd be surprised. Eduardo planned for this moment. He prepared everything we needed, the technology, the team, even the strategy for overcoming opposition. And now we keep building. Eduardo's tidal energy system was just the beginning. There are communities all over the world that could benefit from this technology, and there are probably other breakthrough innovations waiting to be discovered by people who think like Eduardo did." As the sun set over Harbor Point, the town's streetlights came on, powered entirely by the gentle, predictable rhythm of the tides. The harbor glowed with the soft green luminescence of Eduardo's algae monitoring system, providing real-time confirmation that the energy network was operating in perfect harmony with the natural environment. Tom opened Eduardo's journal to the final entry, which seemed to speak directly to this moment. "The greatest inventors are not those who create entirely new technologies, but those who recognize possibilities that have always existed and find ways to make them real. The tides have been carrying energy for millions of years. The challenge was never creating that energy, it was learning to dance with forces greater than ourselves. My grandson will understand this. He will take what I have started and transform it into something I could never have imagined. And someday his children will take what he has built and carry it even further. This is how progress happens, not through individual genius, but through generations of people who believe that tomorrow can be better than today, and who are willing to work to make that belief a reality." Tom closed the journal and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. The tidal generators hummed quietly beneath the pier, their gentle rhythm synchronizing with the eternal breathing of the sea. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new innovations built on the foundation that Eduardo had established. But tonight, Tom simply stood in his grandfather's study, watching the harbor that had powered their dreams, grateful for the legacy of vision and persistence that had transformed a junk house into the launching point for a renewable energy revolution. Outside, the tide was coming in, and with it, the promise of endless, clean energy that would help communities around the world build better futures. Eduardo Reyes had been right about everything: the technology, the timing, and the courage required to change the world. The mansion stood as proof that the most valuable inheritances are not material possessions, but the wisdom to see possibilities where others see only problems, and the determination to make those possibilities real.